I'm ready. Welcome to the 25th anniversary edition of the Finger Lakes Environmental Film Festival. We remind ourselves that we're running this festival as climate catastrophes multiply and intensify, when over 6 million people worldwide have died from COVID, and when the people of Ukraine are fighting the brutal Russian invasion. For all of us at FLEF, the world is our why. I'm Phil Wild, producer with the Finger Lakes Environmental Film Festival. Major sponsors for FLEF include the Park Foundation and Ithaca College. Our festival theme this year is entanglements, a concept that explores how different environments, ideas, imaginaries, places, politics, practices, registers, and species twist into each other and enmesh. We're all very honored that you've joined us today for this international book launch for Devan Rosen's edited volume, The Social Media Debate. Please rename yourself with your physical location after your name. Our partners for today's session are the Park Center for Independent Media and the Interactive Film and Media Journal. We invite you to stay on after the Zoom, after this session concludes, for an informal gathering to celebrate the publication of the Social Media Debate and explore the ideas further. It's an after party. It's with great pleasure that I now introduce you to today's facilitator, Raza Rumi, a prolific author and journalist who serves as the director of the Park Center for Independent Media. Raza?
Thank you very much. And it's a great pleasure to be here. And I welcome everyone and all those who have showed up for this exciting event as we launch a new and a very timely book entitled The Social Media Debate, Unpacking the Social, Psychological, and Cultural Effects of Social Media. A bit about the Park Center for Independent Media. This was launched in 2008 and is a center that fosters the study of journalism-oriented media outlets that create and distribute content outside the corporate systems and news organizations. The center examines the impact of independent media on journalism, democracy, society, and participatory cultures. And we are really happy that for the past few years, we have been collaborating with FLEF to bring great events as well as dialogues, much needed critical debates for all those who join our festival every year. Our dear colleague, Professor Devan Rosen, who is a professor at the Park School here at Ithaca College, is the editor of this volume, and he is very much here, and he shall talk about the book. But let me also introduce our other speakers that are Dr. Francesca Sobande from Cardiff University and Dr. Ysabel Gerrard of the University of Sheffield. We shall hear them out on the book. I have a lot to say, but I'm not going to take any more time. And I'll hand it over to Devan to introduce the book, in particular, the motivation and how the idea came about and how he put together this really interesting volume. One comment that I do want to make is that as the world grapples with the reality and the impact and intensity of social media, after going through this book, it becomes really clear that almost every country on the planet is grappling with that. And in a way, this book gives us so many directions to think about and rethink the impact and the reality of social media. So without further ado, over to you, Rosen.
Thank you, Raza. And hello, everybody. Thank you for coming, colleagues, current students, past students, family from all over the world. It's great to see you. Thank you so much. So yeah, I'm going to take a few minutes and just talk a little bit about why I decided to do this book and some reasons why I think it's really timely and really important, as Raza said. And just to confirm, Francesca, Ysabel, can you see my screen? Great, thank you.
Yes, perfectly, thank you.
Yeah, so here's the book. Really exciting. I refer to it as our book. I have two of my contributing authors here, and although I compiled it, I really think of it as our book. I'm honored by the people that decided to contribute their voice and time and talent to this. I'm humbled by the group that was joining me on this. And so one of the reasons that I decided to work on this project was as I've traveled the country and the world, talking to people from all different kinds of industry and academia, I was learning that we're all kind of experiencing the same effects, or in a variety of ways of the introduction of social media to our culture, to our community, to our families. And some of these effects are quite positive. We're able to connect with people, we're able to access resources embedded in our networks. But a lot of these effects are quite damaging, and we're seeing them in earnest over the last, say, 5 to 10 years, and over the last year or two, even more so. And so the motivation was to bring together a suite of colleagues and voices from different areas and disciplines. I find that many of the books and things that we access are within a discipline. And so, we're usually exposed to that work, or if we try to choose a volume or something, it's all sort of within a certain discipline or area of science. But the problems that we face aren't really able to be solved by any certain discipline or group or even scientific or studies area. And so we really needed to bring together a lot of different voices. And that's what I did in this book. It's unique in that there aren't that many edited volumes that bring together people from very different areas of research. And I'm honored to be joined by two of them here today as my co-panelists in this roundtable. But another thing that that motivated me to do this book was that there is precedent in other problems that we've had that have been somewhat widespread and systemic, that have really required a lot of different voices. And I'm informed by the work in the natural sciences, especially with climate change and environmental degradation. And just to set that up a little bit, in the last century, the petrochemical companies developed products and services that we were told were to make our lives better. They were going to help us. They were going to help our world. They, sort of pitched them as great for everybody, while at the same time hiding their own research that very much said that they were degradations to our natural support systems, and suppressing research that was trying to be done around the world to do this. Obviously, the book, Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, was the breakthrough to fight DDT. And what we know is that obviously environmental degradation did happen. It was predictable. The companies knew it. They did it anyway. And so much as we saw the natural support systems in decline because of these companies, we're seeing our social support systems in decline. And unfortunately, it's happening in a much more rapid way than the natural support systems did. But what we find, and what we're knowing more and more about, thanks to whistleblowers within these companies and the hard work of independent journalists and researchers around the world, we know more and more that these companies, much like the petrochemical companies, knew what they were doing and did it anyway. They knew that they were going to be addictive. They knew that they were going to damage our democracies, and they did it anyway. And they hid it, and they're right now actively suppressing our ability to do research on what they're doing. And so, I'm going to kind of briefly mention 3 different areas that I think are important and to keep in mind. And one is, I think that these logos, and from an individual personal level, might be better represented this way, in that these companies knew very well that what they were doing were creating products that were highly addictive, They were deploying a lot of attention harvesting methods to make sure that they were able to harvest our attention in a way that was making these very addictive. And they knew it and they did it anyway. And then what we have is people who are beholden to their devices, beholden to their social media. And it's become very difficult. We have 3 chapters in the book that are about social media and mental health. And I obviously, I'm honored to have them there, and I encourage people to read them. But it's not just adults that are having these problems. We're finding that more and more younger people, and I know Ysabel has worked on some stuff with younger folks, and we'll hopefully hear from her on that later. But these devices, which are carrying the social media, affect people of all ages. And we're finding that in education really affects our ability to operate in the classroom. I know any parents that are here certainly know what it's like to have their kids using these technologies. But let's keep in mind that these very same companies knew very well that they were deploying things that would also damage our public discourse, that would create divides in our political conversation, that would divide our communities. And they did it anyway. And they know it now, and they're still doing it anyway. Within this is the ability for the algorithmic control, and obviously the content moderation, which again, we'll hear about more later, is causing that to happen. And that's creating racial divides, it's creating issues within racial digital studies. And we have Francesca here, we'll talk about that a little bit. And this has led to some really serious outcomes in our country that led to the misinformation bubble leading to the January 6th insurrection. And, really what we have is these information realities, which are completely distinct from each other. People live in different realities from each other because of these social media technologies. So much so that we actually have some organizations popping up that are so beholden to the misinformation that they'll have people line the streets of Dallas waiting for JFK to come back and believe that and stand there for hours to do it. And these companies, again, that created these technologies did it intentionally and knew it was going to happen. And fortunately, we have a host of scientists around the world that are trying to figure out what are the effects of these and what can we do about it. But on a more macro level, even, we have entire nation states using these devices, using these technologies that were kind of supposed to be to keep us in touch with each other to gain control. Bolsonaro in Brazil would not be ruling right now if it wasn't for his masterful ability to control the social media messaging. Or Duterte in the Philippines. Again, we're seeing horrible outcomes from these people gaining power exclusively because they know how to manipulate the algorithms and the content within social media. And right now, what we're witnessing and experiencing is an example that I'll finish with, and that I think really represents the real debate in social media. The horrible negative effects for Russia and Putin to be able to create their own information reality about what Ukraine is. And this is very important. But on the other hand, we have Ukrainian people and people around the world able to use these same platforms to find family that's lost, to create and coalesce and collaborate around mutual support. They're using social media to manage and organize their resistance. And so at the same time, we see a regime under Putin using social media to create horrible misinformation that's fueling this invasion. But the exact same platform is allowing the Ukrainian people to coordinate, to find each other, to get aid, and to really try to maintain subsistence in this invasion. And again, these same technologies, these same companies are leading to not only negative things. For example, here in Tompkins County, we have Mutual Aid Tompkins, which is if there is somebody in our community that has access to the internet, can access Facebook, they could go to Mutual Aid Tompkins and say, I'm in an emergency, I need something now. I'm out of food and I'm disabled and I can't get to a store. And somebody in our community will answer that call and get them food or get them help. And this is just Mutual Aid Tompkins. This is in hundreds of communities all around the country and world. Same exact technology, same exact platform that is leading to these horrible things. Thus, we need more edited volumes like this. Again, I'm honored to be joined by these incredible authors in this book, but there really is a debate here because we have these social media platforms that allow us to connect with those that we love, to find resources embedded in our networks, and to, in many ways, live a better life. But within that same window, we have our democracies imploding, we have misinformation realities happening all over the place, and we have a globe of people that are becoming chronically addicted to these very same platforms. So here we have this debate. How do we benefit from these things while mitigating the negatives. And we have many chapters in the book that deal with that. Kristen Fuchs writes a whole chapter trying to encourage public internet and public resources, and that's great. And anyway, so that was my motivation to bring people together for this book, is to try to move this conversation forward, to better understand what's happening so that we can bring out the best while mitigating the worst. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Devan. And that was really a very insightful overview of why you undertook this project and all that it contains, especially what relates to the key challenges of our times. So without further ado, I'm going to request Francesca Sobande to talk about her contribution in the volume, especially with regard to the questions of race and ethnicity and how social media plays them out and how it presents them in our everyday reality. Francesca.
Thank you. I just want to start off by saying a huge thank you to everybody who's been involved in making this possible and for inviting me to be a part of today. I'm conscious that time is always incredibly precious for many people, and very few people have a lot of time to spare. So thank you for being here today. I thought I'd start before speaking a bit about my chapter in this book by trying to essentially locate myself or situate myself. And I share that because the title of my chapter, it involves exploring what it means to locate social media in Black digital studies. And essentially what that means is I think about questions to do with geography, to do with differences between various places, and how that then impacts the way people experience the internet and digital media. So to locate myself, I'm based in Cardiff, Wales. It's coming up to around about 4:17 p.m. here. But as you might be able to tell from my accent, I've spent most of my life in Scotland, where I lived for around about 20 years. And I share all of that in the spirit of really picking up on some of the themes that are a part of today: entanglements, histories, power, geography. When I tried to think about locating social media in Black digital studies as part of this chapter in this book, I was really fascinated by exploring how people's experiences online are always connected to their experiences offline. Sometimes there's a risk that conversations to do with the internet involve speaking about the digital world or the so-called virtual world, and then the real world. But as I was discussing with my students today on a module to do with critically analyzing media representations, they're always interconnected, they're always entangled. So when it comes to thinking about Black digital experiences, which is very much at the center of my work, especially the experiences of Black people in the UK and devolved nations within that, such as Scotland and Wales, I often find myself really reflecting on the role of borders and boundaries. So what I mean by that is the perceived borders and boundaries of different places, geographies, but also who does or doesn't have access to various platforms, various digital technologies, and various conversations as well. What does it mean when somebody is able to participate in a certain digital space, but because of who they are, how they represent themselves, they are responded to in ways that can actually prevent them from fully engaging with certain discussions or discourses in a way that other people are able to? So for me, when I talk about locating social media and Black digital studies, I mean, it's important when we're speaking about social media and digital media, as has already been touched on, to not confine ourselves to any one discipline or any one area of research. We are always thinking about politics, sociology, we're always thinking about visual culture. And for me, when we're thinking about Black digital studies, we're focusing on different histories that relate to racism, that relate to interconnected forms of inequality, and also histories that relate to the creativity and the innovativeness and the collectiveness of Black people. Here, it's helpful for me to throw out a provocation and something that I reflect on in my chapter, actually. Black Twitter is a space that many people are likely familiar with, at least to some extent. Several years ago, if you tried to have a conversation with various people working in media and marketing in the UK, they would question what Black Twitter was, certainly in some settings. And now they're very quick to try and replicate what they see happening in that space, content that goes viral, content that's very impactful. And when we think about a space such as Black Twitter, although there isn't always reference to a certain geographical location within those discussions, there's always a geography or geographies that are present. So I'm really interested in how I see discussions and experiences of Black Twitter happening all around the world. Of course, thinking in particular about North America and the US, but more recently, we're even seeing evidence of Twitter acknowledging the specifics of Black British Twitter experiences and what it means there to reflect on diasporic identity, racial identity, but the particular nature of various places where people are living their lives, but also connecting with Black people elsewhere. So a question that I asked myself in this chapter is, although Black British Twitter is a term that's increasingly recognised in the media here, Black Scottish Twitter is yet to sort of be part of the discussion. And that speaks to some really interesting questions to do with geography, to do with power, to do with dynamics between various regions and nations, and to do with identity and digital media in general. I'll wrap up what I have to say here by just saying that when reflecting on the work of my colleagues, including Ysabel's piece and questions to do with content moderation, who or what counts as content moderation or a content moderator, questions I often ask myself as part of the work I do include who or what it tends to be foregrounded in discussions of digital media and discussions of social media in particular. And more often than not, there can sometimes be the case that questions to do with identity, questions to do with racial identity and Black experiences, they can be sidelined or inadvertently overlooked. So my contribution to this book is a way of really thinking through the entanglements of identity, inequality, power, digital media in ways that foreground Black geographies and hopefully challenge some of the boundaries that are sometimes perceived as separating disciplines and discussions within them. Thank you very much for listening to me today.
Thank you so much. That was really, really interesting and, of course, very insightful. I mean, I am I'm a great example of somebody who has learned a lot about these issues from social media. Of course, I may have been misinformed along the way as well, as our next speaker will elaborate. So I will invite Ysabel Gerrard, who has contributed on content moderation and the king of our times, the algorithm, how it determines what we see, what we read, what perhaps we think. And over to you, Ysabel.
Thank you so much, Raza, and thank you so much to everyone for being here today and for the kind invitation to present alongside Francesca, which I feel very proud to do because I think her work is phenomenal. I just want to start by saying a huge congratulations to Devan. I feel while it's completely wonderful that you refer to it as our book, I'm so grateful to you. And I think, you know, wrangling so many academics in a pandemic is, I seriously don't know how you did that. So cheers to you, Devan, and thank you so much for inviting me to contribute and for all the work that you've put in. I'm very, very grateful. So I actually found it really hard to settle on a topic for my kind of 5-minute intro, because I think you can just go in so many directions with the things that I wrote about in the chapter. But I think what I keep being drawn back to is the title of the book, so The Social Media Debate, because it is a debate, and it's a debate that we don't just grapple with in academic terms. As Devan mentioned in his introduction, we're grappling with it in our everyday lives as well. And I think it's really easy, especially if you're invited to critique social media in some way, it's really easy to fall into that trap of kind of just thinking about the harms and the consequences and the problems. And because they are so powerful, they are so vivid, we talk about them all the time. But then there are benefits of social media. We enjoy it in so many ways. And it's really hard to strike that balance. And I think what's also really interesting when we think about the social media debate is, to what extent is this a new debate? To what extent are the questions that we're asking about social media new? You know, I'm thinking of something like cyberbullying. So I actually work with children at the moment in schools across the UK. Oh, my cat's here. Hi. And I work with children between the ages of kind of around 12 up to about 17. And I think one of my most vivid memories of doing that was, so I went into a secondary school and I got talking to the head teacher of the school. And I went to interview him about anonymous apps. So apps where you're allowed to be anonymous and not say anything about yourself. And they are very, very popular with kids. And he was telling me about a particular incident in the school where one of the students had gone home and she downloaded an app called YOLO. So it was kind of an add-on to Snapchat. And she used YOLO over the weekend and on the Friday evening to crowdsource a list of what she called the school's ugliest girls. So she said it's the definitive list of the school's ugliest girls. And she went home on the Friday night, she compiled this list, she asked for contributions across multiple social media platforms. And then by the Sunday night, she had arrived at this list and then she publicized it on her Instagram and then it spread across the school. And then the head teacher gets to school on the Monday morning and has a literal queue of parents and students and everyone who was on this list who was completely devastated. And he really didn't know what to do. And I think he knew what to do from a safeguarding perspective. He knows how to do his job. But one of the things he was really struggling with was that he didn't know how YOLO worked. He didn't know what YOLO was. It was this brand new app that he'd never heard of. And he really felt like he needed to understand the app before he decided on essentially a suitable punishment, quote unquote. And that anecdote really got me thinking about how, to what extent can we blame YOLO for that? What did YOLO do that couldn't have happened without social media, or that could have happened without social media? Could that list have circulated with the speed it did? Could it have reached so many people? Could it have happened outside of the school gates in the way that it did? You know, it just opened up all these questions and debates around what was new in that scenario and what was not. And what I found very fascinating was that the head teacher felt like, because it was a new platform that he'd never heard of, it warranted a new kind of consequence. You know, he felt the newness of the situation in a very sort of strong way. And in my chapter, one of the things I really grapple with is to what extent do we need to rewrite the rules, especially around something like content moderation? So content moderation is essentially just, what are you allowed to say on social media and what are you not allowed to say? What can you post? What breaks the rules? There are some kinds of posts that very obviously shouldn't be allowed, but then you have this huge gray area. You know, would one post trigger someone but support someone else, for example? And I think we see these debates very vividly, as Devan has already said, with regards to mental health. It's often very, very difficult to create rules around mental health related posts. But what is new here, what is new with the social media debate is that people can create and upload so much content, and there is a lot of it. And these are the problems that we are having with social media. These are the problems that we're having with content moderation, is the volume of content, and it's forcing us to ask really serious questions about the best ways to moderate it. So I think that the debates that we're having, mental health, body image, bullying, you know, we talked about that with regards to TV, radio, film. All of these things, all of these debates have happened in the past, but there kind of is something new here. And that's one of the things that I try to grapple with in the chapter, and that I grapple with through my research every day, is to what extent is what's happening new? Where's the new in the social media debate? Thank you very much for allowing me the chance to introduce myself, and I'm looking forward to any questions that anyone has.
Thank you so much. And may I remind all the participants that you can ask questions, keep your questions ready, because we shall be coming in a few minutes. I do have a few follow-up questions, but before that, I'd, in particular, to, responding to what you all said, especially, Devan's references to misinformation and how it is a threat to democracy in so many countries, including the US. And and you did mention Ukraine as well, which is now, we have a war on ground, but there's also a war on social media in parallel, where so much disinformation through TikTok, is being spread by Russian sort of bots, etc. And they earlier did try to influence the political process here in the US. So there's an entire playbook ready. So I'm very curious, Devan, about this ongoing sort of debate. And from the book that you have compiled, I mean, I'm sure that other authors have also mentioned how disinformation can be not just a danger, but also has inimical long-term effects. So can you elaborate a little bit on that further?
Yeah, sure. And thank you again to Ysabel and Francesca for your intros. And thank you, Raza, for the question. So that's a somewhat complicated series of topics in that question that you asked. But I think what lies underneath it with the misinformation and disinformation is that, or at least getting to what Ysabel was introducing with her words about like kind of what's new, because governments manipulating information is certainly not new, or using manipulated and misinformation is not new. Certainly the rise of the Nazi regime was largely because they were really, really good at controlling the message. That was one of the main elements there. And so that's not new, right? Democracy is falling because of messaging is also not new. Governments manipulating what people can hear is not new. But what is new is that it's all happening through the conduit of a media environment that is not just a black box to us and to the politicians, but we're at a point that it's kind of when I say black box, I mean, we don't really know what's happening inside, right? And it's to the point that the companies themselves no longer really know what's happening. And so if we have information that's spreading around this information ecosystem, we're going to see and we're going to be exposed to the content that makes those algorithms prove themselves as really, really good. And so we have machine learning in there. And for those that are in the area, that's the algorithms within these platforms are iterative. They learn what's happening and they learn what's getting better. And they're given certain parameters for success. And so success is engagement, success is eyeball time, success is keeping us going, keeping us on the platform, sharing. And so if that success means we're being put into these information realities where we are only seeing and hearing what we are being exposed to, that creates a milieu, environment in which governments can very easily manipulate what people can see and understand and hear. And it's very efficient and it's very fast. And that is very new, right? If we look at traditional media, it was a little bit slower. It was easier to vet. We could have independent media existing in cohort. But even independent media, and Raza, to your center, for you to get into somebody's information world within social media might be impossible.
Yeah.
As opposed to more traditional media, it was available. And so I think that not to fully answer the question, because I would encourage people to read the chapters in the book to get those answers, but is that this is new to the point that we don't even really know how to unpack it. We don't exactly know how it's happening, and we can't turn to the companies for those answers.
Yes, Devan, I think these are really useful insights, and I think we'll take it further, elaborate it further during Q&A. I'm sure others have questions too. I was really intrigued by Francesca's work, and I read the chapter. You mentioned about the need for the term Scottish Black Twitter is yet to sort of emerge. But I can say this, that there's a whole school of thought in the US, for example, which says that, because of social media, a lot of police brutalities against African Americans are now highlighted far more often, or at least more people know about it. So it is also being viewed as a kind of a positive development or intervention. So I don't know, how would you respond to that, especially in a post-George Floyd world that we are living in, where social media was playing and played a major role even in the summer of 2020?
Sure. Yeah, I think here I'm thinking about more discussions I had earlier this morning with lots of students. So we were speaking in general about media representation, but we were trying to discuss what it means to acknowledge both the potential for depictions to be enriching in various ways, to contribute to societal change, to convey important messaging, and including counter narratives, but also at the same time acknowledging the fact that these sorts of representations, or the places where they're found, can also cause harm. And for me, if I'm thinking about social media and various platforms, I'm always acknowledging the fact that one platform can offer the chance for people, including Black people around the world, to connect, create, collaborate, share knowledge, to archive histories. But those same platforms can also be a source of surveillance, a source of online abuse, a source of many different forms of harm. And I think when I was throwing out the example of this notion of Black Scottish Twitter, I was sort of playing with that idea for different reasons.
Yes.
I've been working on a project with a good friend, an independent researcher and writer, for several years on Black Scottish history, and we've got a forthcoming book called Blackhood Here, Black Lives in Scotland. And we're always interested in the fact that if you speak to somebody about Scottish Twitter, chances are, depending on where you're located again, people might have a sense of some of the humour you're referring to. And even if you speak about different examples of Scottish social media and digital content, what was viral, there was a brief pop-up exhibition in Edinburgh, in Scotland's capital, on Scottish social media content. But what's always absent in a lot of these discussions is recognition of the experiences of people in Scotland who are Black, or people in Scotland in general who aren't white. So I think it's really interesting when I threw out this provocation, the absence of discussion or recognition of what might be referred to as Black Scottish Twitter. I think it raises lots of interesting questions about whose experiences tend to be foregrounded, what assumptions are there about identity, nationality, cultural references as well. What does it mean to blend different examples of Scottish cultural references and Black diasporic cultural references in ways that can actually really challenge people's assumptions about identity, life, and the many different layers of who people are and how they experience the internet.
Yeah, absolutely, yes. And before I go to Ysabel, I do want to pick. Actually, I just thought the term viral itself. I mean, it needs so much unpacking, and I mean, it's a really loaded term of our times, But I think the impact on journalism itself, is so inimical. I mean, a lot is being now researched and written about as to how newsrooms are just so focused on clickbait instruments, and how the success of a story or impact of a story or even quality of journalism is being viewed through how many likes or shares or retweets or take place, which often defeats the entire purpose of sometimes uncovering the truth and or just presenting facts to the people. But anyway, Ysabel, on a separate note, I mean, I just wanted to you to elaborate a bit about the impact on teens, particularly young people. As Facebook and Instagram have come under immense criticism for the harmful effects that young teenagers have had through their Instagram experience. So I would like to talk you to talk a bit about that.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. It's very much at the forefront of my mind because, like I said, at the moment I'm conducting field work, and I love going into schools and just like getting kids to talk to me. I think I feel very privileged to be able to do that. And I think one of the things that I kind of struggle with a little bit, to be honest with you, is this notion of effects. And effects is a word I try to stay away from when I write about children, because I think it can be quite disempowering. And I think it's accurate in some contexts, in some respects, and it's a very powerful word. And it can often be used in the right way. But I think when you're talking about children, I don't feel comfortable kind of implying that a child would be affected by a technology, especially if you're not going to kind of take into account the other factors that are going on in that child's life, their upbringing, political unrest, the climate that they're growing up in, the school systems, a million other factors about their identity and their social situation, and also their biology that all come into play when we think about how affected a child is. So that's something that I feel like I've like dodged the question by questioning the question, but it's something that people worry about. And I go into schools and teachers say to me, I'm worried about the effect. But I find it really difficult to prove effect as divorced from other factors in that child's life.
Yeah, no, I think this is great because, I mean, we do need to reframe, and even when we question some of these key issues, we must know what to question, right? So your the question was a great exercise, actually. So we must open it up to our audience. I'm sure who have many questions. We have 2 hands. Oh, 3. Great. So, well, I would first invite Ian from Ithaca. He is our regular, participant in FLEF and PCIM events. So, Ian, over to you. You muted.
Hi, Raza. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, everyone. So I work at Cornell in Student Services, and I'm also on the board of the Tompkins County Youth Service Department. And so I am absolutely frightened at the impact of social media on young people, particularly during the pandemic. My question for any of you who would like to respond is, there are clearly many things we need to investigate as to what needs to be done. Is it certain types of moderation? Is it certain restrictions? And I understand this may vary by country as well. What I'm very worried about is how. So my question to you is, how do you think is the best? What do you think is how do we go about doing that in the way that is most effective? Is regulation the answer? Is having government take a hand in this the answer to it? Or is it just, do we need the companies to be pressured? As unrealistic as it may be, part of me thinks regulation can do it, but I am very worried about regulatory capture, given the amount of money that's spent. So is it regulation? Could that address a lot of these things? Or do we need consumer demand? Do we need simply the threat of litigation and regulation to force these firms to spend their money to address these issues? What would be more effective?
Great. Ysabel, I think maybe you will be the right person to address this.
Thank you so much for that question, Ian. I could answer it in about a million different ways, and I'm kind of trying to choose the most helpful answer. But I think there's a million things that could happen. But I think one of the things that needs to happen on a societal level is that we lower our expectations in our demands for perfection in moderation. There are always going to be things that slip through the net. We're always going to have bad content. Evidently, the models that the big social media companies are using right now, which is a combination of automated mechanisms and asking humans to review the more complex, sensitive cases, it's not working to its fullest effect. And I remember reading a really interesting piece by a scholar called Tarleton Gillespie, who's at Microsoft Research, who proposed that what we need to really be doing is training automated moderation systems to be able to identify the most graphic and traumatic, so that the humans who are doing moderation only have to review sort of the less awful things to avoid them getting sort of PTSD and having their own problems. So I think that the moderation mechanisms need to shift. I think from a UK perspective, I think schools and governments need to get better at providing social media safety education. It is diabolically bad. I was very surprised because it's not standardized across the country, and you go into a school and they talk to the kids about Facebook, and then you say, okay, well, how many of you use Facebook? And none of them put their hands up. And so I think we need better social media safety and education tools as well. But there's a million other things that I could say, but I want to hand over to Francesca and Devan and see what their thoughts are as well.
Yeah. if you want to respond to that, Devan.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Ysabel. So Ian, it not only is it a fantastic question, it's something that is, I think, one of the key areas to try to think through. And you brought up, governmental regulation. You brought up whether or not the corporations are going to do it on their own, or individuals, putting pressure. And I think a way of thinking about that is, what interests would any of these stakeholders have in doing something about this, right? From a corporate level, they have zero interest in doing anything about that, right? This is engagement, this is profit. These are housed in the United States. The profit motive underlines their ability to be a corporation. So even if they individually have the motivation, they, on the corporate level, can't, right? The people that are in, at least in our representative government in the United States, run on elections, which they would prefer to be able to control the information for their own betterment. And even on the individual level, as humans and parents, maybe we're motivated, but maybe we're happy that we have something to distract somebody with. And so it really requires a lot of education and a lot of, it's going to be a hard push. And I could see you're worried, and you should be.
Yeah. So Francesca, if you want to add anything, please go ahead.
Sure, I'll keep it brief. It's to really echo a comment I can see that someone's shared, I think, Anna, speaking about new media literacies. The first thing that came to my mind was critical media literacy. There's not enough of it, and it needs to start early. Quite often, the point at which people start to learn about things such as media framing, editorializing, narrative, the role of narrating, or sort of the narrativization of reality, and the filtered nature of media depictions. All of these different forms of media power need to be part of education as early as possible. So it's not that I don't think more should be done in terms of the policy side of stuff and big tech, but I never have belief in a top-down approach. I think it has to start at the bottom. It has to be grassroots, and it has to involve a lot of critical media literacy education, which is always attentive to different forms of power and inequality, including but not limited to racism, sexism, classism, and many different other issues too.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I will come to Anna Wiles, a very important question, but we have Professor Andrew Utterson, our colleague here at Park School. Andrew, over to you. Yes.
Yeah, congratulations to Devan and to Ysabel and to Francesca for your collective achievement. It is really wonderful to see this book, and I'm looking forward to delving into it now that I've gotten a sense of it through today's event. I wanted to pick up, if I may, on the question around effects, because I too was fascinated to see it in the subtitle of this book. And so I really have two questions. One is for Devan, and that is to give some sense of how effects figures throughout this collected work in full, whether or not it engages media effects debates and what new you see here, because responding to Ysabel, very rightly challenging the classical models of simply us being acted upon in quite instrumental and determinist ways, the model of the hypodermic needle as somehow injecting us with content or ideas or an effect. So I wanted to ask Ysabel too, and perhaps Francesca, to think about effects in terms of agency, in terms of what ability we have to, if there is an effect, to circumvent it or to resist it or reorient it or somehow undermine it, or what used to be called reading against the grain in the context of messaging and effects more generally.
Thank you, Andrew. And maybe Devan, you can take the lead, and then if
yeah, sure. I'm going to keep my statement here very brief, because I think your question was outstanding, but maybe better directed at my co-panelists here. Regarding the volume itself, the kind of effects that our authors have discussed are quite varied, because they come from a lot of different disciplines. But what I'll say is that as much as I would like this book to be more of a debate, the effects tend to be a little bit one-sided, and with the exception of maybe one chapter, they're generally complicated and leading to the negative side. But I know we're a little tight on time here, and so with your question, I think my two co-panelists might be uniquely positioned to answer. So I'll hand it off to, I guess Ysabel was the first one that you referred to.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question, Andrew. I thought it was really powerfully articulated. We need to talk more about agency. We really do. Not just in terms of, children and people with vulnerabilities, but just all of us. And what's really interesting to me is that we, anyone with any kind of like media studies of a background, whatever level you were at when you received it, that effects theories are kind of historically disproven. And what's weird is that we're seeing a resurgence of them, but we're not critiquing them in the same way. And a really powerful example in terms of agency was, all the kind of body image debates around, especially young girls looking at filtered images and it creating new body standards. There was a study, and I'm going to have to find it because I can't remember who the author was, but it basically, they worked with lots of teenagers, and they were able to decipher the difference between a filtered image and a non-filtered image. And I think, where is that story being told? When the Daily Mail or whatever headline says, teenage girls, blah, blah, blah. Where's that study? Where's that they are so savvy, they're just so savvy and knowledgeable that they're like, oh yeah, well, that one's filtered and that one's not, that one's edited and that one's not, and they knew. And it just makes me think, where are those stories around agency? So thank you for that question and reminding me of that example.
Yes, thank you. Anna, while you had your question, do you still want to ask it? Because it was partly addressed. Let me check with Anna if she's still around.
No, I'm fine. It's just what was on my mind when thinking of this also ability of being creative then, and not only using it as ICTS skills in order to protect oneself reading, but rather as a form of expressivity and of agency, empowerment in the sense, to use this big word.
Yes.
Thanks to all of you.
Thank you, Anna. I'll go to Professor Monica Mehta, who's also joined us. Please, Monica, welcome, and your question. Do unmute yourself, please.
Yes, thank you, everyone. I'm really enjoying this discussion about this topic. Francesca, the term that resonated with me in terms of what you mentioned was the question of equity. And I wanted to speak about, I wanted your thoughts on equity with respect to both access to the internet, with regard to internet speeds, what's able to be downloaded, what's able to be uploaded, who's able to upload how much, who can only download but can't really upload. And then along with the question of equity, maybe to tie it up to the discussion that we're having about teenagers and harm related to teenagers. I was wondering how discussions like this emerge as salient discussions. So I'm curious whether on Black Scottish Twitter, this is a salient discussion. Are on Black Scottish teenager, is it on Black Scottish Twitter, is it important to be talking about the harms that are happening to teenagers? Or is there something else that's happening to teenagers? Or are teenagers not even an issue? And similarly, is Ukraine the most significant and salient world problem and war that's happening? Or are there other wars? Are there other things that are happening? And what does equity have to do with what we see and what we get involved in?
Right, great. Francesca, yes, please unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you very much for that really fantastic question. There's so much I'd like to share, so I'm going to try and keep it brief. But the first question around equity, I think amongst the many problems that are rarely addressed is the fact that sometimes equity in relation to digital media, the focus is solely on access. But even once somebody has access to digital technology, devices and internet connection, depending on how they're treated and once they're able to participate in different digital spaces, one person might be able to access the same space as another, but because of who they are and because of different inequalities, their experience of that space is still going to be so different. There are going to be so many issues to do with inequality and inequity that need to be addressed. So alongside, as you said, issues to do with access to tech, internet connection, I'm thinking about what happens once someone is able to participate in a space, but there are still issues that are very much creating a hostile environment for them and which they face regardless of whether or not they can access technology or the internet. The other 2 points that came to mind, one was connecting to the earlier conversation around agency. And here I'm reminded of Bell Hooks' phenomenal work on the oppositional gaze, which I was speaking about with students today. And I think sometimes there could be an assumption that when we're dealing with the experiences of perhaps, say, Black individuals or different minoritized individuals, there can just be a focus on perceived deficits or a lack of agency, depending on what space the conversation is happening in. And here I'm so grateful for work such as that of Bell Hooks, which talks about the incredible forms of agency, forms of resistance, forms of creativity that are always present, including, as you're alluding to, with regards to the experiences of teenagers. So I'll just wrap up there saying I think Black Scottish Twitter is a really interesting and exciting space. I'm 30, so a lot has changed since I lived in Scotland. There's a lot of content there now that was not around before. And I think we're just starting to see the beginning of some really exciting discussions about the differences and similarities between the lives of Black people in Scotland, England, Northern Ireland, Wales, North America and beyond, and really rich forms of content and creativity that provide me with a lot of hope.
Great. Okay. Right. So any further comment you want to make, Devan or Ysabel, or we just have a we have 3 minutes left. Okay, great. So we have a question by Julian Sobel, who's a student at Ithaca College. So Julian.
I might actually yield to Lauren here. Yeah.
Yes. Okay, Lauren.
Oh, thanks, Julian. Devan, it's great to see you and congratulations on your book. And this may be a very, very highly specific question to my current situation, but it was something that I really wanted to ask anyway. So you talk a lot about social media being a black box of misinformation, which of course it is. But now with living and working in Japan, something that I've seen is that the main news network here, NHK, has also spread a lot of misinformation, especially around the Black Lives Matter movement and COVID-19. A lot of it is really rooted in xenophobia. And I've seen a lot of independent news creators try to go ahead and combat that on social media. I was wondering if you can speak more about that and how consumers can make sure that that is accurate information. Yeah, sorry, it's a little bit late here.
Okay, Devan.
Yeah, I'll keep my comments brief. Thank you, Lauren, for the question. And I'm happy you brought it up in that way because the chapter on misinformation and digital ethics was written by Melissa Zimdars, and her chapter on misinformation was specifically about the relationship to like more traditional news, or what she calls even imposter news networks, and the ability for those news networks, even if it's not an imposter news network, but a network that's doing something that's not necessarily accurate, using social media to echo off what it's doing to legitimize what its coverage is, and creating this sort of cross-platform legitimization. And so it's a fascinating discussion. I encourage you to see what Melissa has to say about that. But what I'll add to that, and it came up earlier, I think one of the main tools we have is still coming back to media literacy and digital media literacy. It may be the only tool in our toolbox left that may stand a chance here, because what you bring up and between the echo chamber between the different platforms, it's quite different. It's quite difficult to untangle those. And so it's an excellent question. I won't take more time here because it's fascinating, but a little bit more involved. But it is important to consider that it's not just on social media. This is being replicated and echoed with more traditional media and news networks as well. And that's really important to keep in mind. It's not a black box of a platform. The algorithms were the black box that I was referring to. So excellent question. Thank you, Lauren.
Thank you, Lauren.
Thank you so much.
Yes, so I guess we have to conclude now. Julian, I'm really sorry you sacrificed your time. So
Excuse me, Raza, we have 5 more minutes for the discussion.
Okay, very
So
good.
we can bring Julian in, 5 more
Okay.
minutes for the discussion, and then some time for takeaways. We go to 1:15.
Thank you, Dr. Zimmerman. Yes, Julian, go on.
Okay, seems I have time after all. Yeah, so I wanted to sort of just turn to the book very quickly and sort of ask a question about sort of what I've been seeing with all of these discussions is this sort of like underlying sort of cascade of like paradoxes. You know, it's never completely good, it's never completely bad. There's always good and bad effects. A lot of the research I do in my sort of political theory work and stuff like that is oriented around progress and sort of the mixed sort of effects that it has, the fact that it's not always a good thing as it's sometimes sort of talked about, and often it's not always a bad thing either. So I guess I sort of want to ask around, like, to what degree do you think you're basing the book on sort of a lot of these questions, these paradoxes and stuff like that?
That's an excellent question. I think that some of what you were asking there comes around, those paradoxes might hinge on participation, is one way of interpreting it. And regarding comments on participation and participatory elements, social media, we have just recently one of our other contributing authors has joined, Nico Carpentier joined, and I was wondering if one of the producers might be able to bring him up. And Nico, if you're willing to just maybe answer Julian's question a little bit on your work on participation and how that paradox might be unfolding there. Again, I'm calling on one of my authors who's only showed up recently, but Nico, if you're willing to comment a little on that, since your work sort of parallels that and your chapter does as well.
The sound was pretty bad, so if Julian gives a quick summary of the question, then I might even be able to contribute.
Yeah, so social media has a series of paradoxes in terms of sort of its effects. And so the question now is, so how does participation in social media, how does that form sort of how does that complicate how we think about things like progress, how we think about things like, yeah, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. I think it's been a question that's been bothering me for 20 years. So I might not have an immediate answer to you. I think you're right in arguing that it's paradoxical. And I always sort of shy away from looking at this question as a question about social media participation, because I think that's simply too broad to answer. I think we need to look at particular processes, particular even sub-processes, because then our answers will be extremely different in all of these cases. So if we talk about participation in Facebook itself as an organization, we will reach totally different conclusions than when we look at participation through Facebook in, say, environmental communication debates. So we dare have maybe too often spoken about levels that we simply cannot analyze and cannot capture. So that would be, I think, one of my answers is to be a bit careful with at what level to analyze and not to sort of, in a way, black box analytically social media, but to open up the box and analytically look at very, very different processes that are indeed paradoxical and I would even say contradictory. But I think that's also the definition of participation itself. So, but yeah, that will be a very short, knowing that time is short, a very, very short comment. And nice to see all of you, a bit late, but still.
Thank you, Nico, for joining us. In fact, we really wanted to take advantage of your presence and ask you about Ukraine and the misinformation around that war and invasion, and in particular what Russia is using the social media as a tool, as an instrument of war. So we very much would like to get your thoughts on that. I'm sure the audience would be very interested in this. Yes.
Okay, we got another 5 hours, right? This is asking for trouble if you ask a question like that. No, obviously it's a fascinating topic. And I think that maybe I would here use a counterintuitive approach and just remind all of you of this concept called the fog of war. It's a very old one. It was actually not even von Clausewitz that used it in exactly that formulation, but it actually goes back to this kind of work, and it was originally meant to refer to the complexities of the battlefield itself, literally the fog on the battlefield. But we started using it to think about propaganda and ideology. And I like the concept because it calls for modesty. So I think we need to be careful when we talk about Russia and Ukraine and the role of media, because the fog of war, for 3 reasons, actually. The fog of war blinds us. It's extremely hard to tell exactly what is going on. Anyhow, we are very, very much struggling with understanding propaganda and how that is being organized, not just Russian propaganda, but also Western propaganda. And thirdly, we're also blinded because of core ideological constructions. We're dealing actually with our own hegemonies, not just Russian hegemonies and Russian propaganda strategies and the Russian contribution to the information war. And I think I always like to take, in these conflicts, like to take a step back and think a bit about not just how Russia is handling this and is creating its own discursive community, which makes sense in a Russian context, trying to convince Russians we're not the target group, right? Russia is the target group. But it also makes sense to deconstruct our own logics, our own ideological constructions, how we, for instance, online constantly keep on repeating that the world is against Putin. Well, this is clearly not the case. China, India, a lot of African countries are very hesitant to play a role. We're constantly repeating over and over again that Ukraine actually stands a chance and that the Russian army is not functioning well. Well, if you look at the map of the military invasion, you see progress from the Russian side. You see large parts of Ukraine being conquered. We like to believe that Ukraine is fighting back, but maybe this is our guilt speaking, our wishful thinking speaking more than anything else. So there are all sorts of constructions online that I think are absolutely vital. But one final thought, just to provoke all of you a bit. I think what this war has shown is that we're actually all, in a very participatory way, we are co-producing our own propaganda.
Okay, Nico, that's truly a provocative thought, and I think thank you so much for joining us. We are
Pleasure.
coming to a close of this session, and that's what I wanted to earlier go on to, the takeaways from our speakers, our panelists, and maybe we can start with you, Devan, your key takeaway, and summarizing the discussion. So just in a minute or so.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you to everybody. Thank you, Nico, at the end there. I'm happy you were able to come in and give us comments. I will also note that Nico and his colleague, Henry Jenkins, are the last chapter in the book as well, with a chapter called What Does God Need with a Starship? It's a conversational chapter, and I'm sure you're all looking forward to getting to it. But to wrap this up, and what I'll say is to not necessarily wrap up our conversation here, but to sort of make a final comment on the part of the motivation with the book, and to an earlier question, actually the first question about where would there be some hope. And I think that I'm one of the reasons that I'm hopeful, given the complexity and the depth of this debate, is that we have a globe of people in the sciences and the studies trying to answer these questions, trying to unpack these entangled debates. And we've always been able to count on a planet of coordinated scientists and study scholars to help us. Because getting to that question, I don't think that the governments will. I have no confidence that the corporations will. But humans and their communities and their families using digital media literacy in cohort with researchers like those that I'm joined in this book, working together are really the not only the only hope, but a quite hopeful thing. And I do think that it's important that we bring together as many voices as we can, as many perspectives as we can, to try to answer these questions and have these conversations. That's what I tried to do in this edited volume. That's what we tried to do in this conversation. If we have any lesson from the natural sciences, if we could all come together as a globe of people trying to answer these questions, we hopefully can. And so thank you to everybody.
Thank you, Devan. Francesca, may I request you to give your parting thoughts?
Thank you. Yeah, one's a reflection and one's a provocation. The reflection is just, I think, the importance again of critical media and digital literacy, but also remembering that that doesn't just happen in formal or institutional educational settings, and that's happening all the time in ways that are also often overlooked, especially within academia, overlooked by academia. And then the provocation is just to pick up on some of what's been spoken about and thinking about, as Nico discussed, contradictions, tensions, they're always present, grappling with them, and remembering that all the words we've spoken about today, they're never neutral, they're always functioning in political ways. So when we speak about progress from whose point of view, in what sort of way, one person's perception of progress is another person's perception of decline or destruction. And when we're thinking about so-called good or bad content as well, whose definition, what criteria is used. So that's a final provocation to throw out, is maybe just how we continue to work with shared terms whilst recognizing the different ways we use these terms and the different forms of political activity and geographical locations that inform their meaning.
Thank you, Francesca. And last but not the least, Ysabel.
Thank you so much. I think one of the things that this discussion has really reminded me of is how our experiences of social media are not homogenous. We all bring different aspects of ourselves to bear when we use social media, when we talk about it, when we think about it. We have different experiences, we have different worries, we have different priorities. And I think that that's something that comes through really beautifully in this book, is how every single person, you know, they're excited by something different, they're scared of something different to the next person. And I think that's what's really nice as you read through it, is not just how much you learn, but how much you're reminded of those differences. And it can feel really overwhelming that there's so much to worry about, but there's also so much to celebrate and so much to learn. And I think my final parting thought is maybe almost a grammatical shift in the way that we talk about social media. Has it just become so diverse that we need to avoid talking about it as a single thing? Is it really social media, or is it Instagram, or is it, you know, VK in Russia, or is it Weibo in China? You know, what is it? What is social media? Is it a single thing, or is it incredibly multiple and diverse? So thank you very, very much.
Thank you. These were really, really important remarks. And I think that it opens the way for further research, engagement, and thinking. And, you know, congratulations to all of you, all the panelists for you know, coming up with this very important book. And I hope everybody gets a copy. Yes, please do. The links have been shared in the chat box. And Devan, congrats once again. And thanks to everybody who's here from so many parts of the world, you know, UK, Singapore, you know, and many other countries. I'm seeing I don't have access to the full list, but I'm also grateful to Flev and our great team there for producing this and for, you know, bringing everyone together. So with that, thank you once again, and hopefully see you at the next FLEF event.